I was looking for the fire.
Well,
yeah, we're supposed to be fireside chatting.
this is our fire.
It's our fire. Yes,
We are the fire.
Yeah, well, I was wondering if that was the implied possibility. Monique, I feel like we've gotten a chance to spend a lot of time together.
Yeah.
Over the past year and a half or so, which has been a pleasure for me. And I have learned a great deal from you in that time. Some of what I've learned through the book, but an awful lot of what I've learned through observing you walking through the world. One of the most important things that I've learned is that you have a tendency to begin with the wisdom of Black girls, to center them, to start with them. So, often, even with your own daughters.
I do.
So I'm going to start with a story about my daughter to lead us off. So I have two daughters, one who's 16 and one who's 4. My 4-year-old has been fairly delayed in speech, but now that she's speaking, she really only just says exactly what she believes and thinks, and her truths just are to be known at all times. She's in a Lego club at our public library, and it's in our downtown public library, and typically it's quite diverse, and specifically usually a lot of Black kids and particularly Black girls in her Lego club. But this week she went with her childcare provider on Tuesday afternoon. She walked in, and she was the only Black girl there. And she walked in and she says, "Hey, where are all the brown ones?"
Mm-hmm. That's a legit question.
That is maybe the most important question. And I was like, yes, God, let's. Mm-hmm. She noticed that we were not there. She was irritated by it, and she felt like she needed to mark our absence. That's right. Where are the brown ones? Where are my brown friends? What have y'all done with my people? Mm-hmm. So beginning with the wisdom of girls, I want to ask you why you think we so infrequently ask, where are all the Black girls?
Mm-hmm. So, first, good afternoon, y'all. I hope we're not having this chat alone. Good afternoon, y'all. Yeah. Okay, thank you. I spent a lot of time figuring out nice academic ways to answer that question in the last 2 years about how we have failed to examine the conditions of Black girls, how their conditions have been obscured by a dominant narrative that focuses primarily on young men and boys, and that renders them invisible in all of these discourses that we have about equity, diversity, inclusion, et cetera. I want to instead say that I want to answer that by telling a story of 12-year-old Monique. And I was in PE, and this 6-foot-tall Black boy stepped on my shoes. And I flashed. And I think I took him down with a Tayatoshi. And I was sent to the principal's office for the first time. It was also right after a time that I had been sexually abused. It was also a time that I was coming to understand inequity because I was the maid for a white woman who lived across the street to pay off a debt that my family owed. It was also during a time that I was watching my cousins suffer from some extreme violence that no one was seeing. So when he stepped on my shoes, he stepped on more than my shoes.
He caught all that.
He caught it all, which is why I think I was able to take down a 6-foot, dude with a Tayatoshi. And then I was surprised, because this is A+ student Monique, and what is she doing fighting, and what is she doing in the principal's office? And even the principal was like, what are you doing here? And then my teacher pulled me to the side and said, how did you do it? And there were all these things that were sort of floating through my mind, and they float through my mind regularly when I see statistics that show what's happening with Black girls and why we don't necessarily see it. Because on paper, I was a high performer. Because of my high performance, I was able to get a question about how did you do it, and ooh, aren't you a strong girl? And no one ever figured out or asked me why I got into that fight with him. We were able to reconcile because finally we were able to reconcile. We both like Cameo, so that worked, right? But no one ever asked those questions, and we don't ask those questions when we see girls getting in trouble. And in fact, you know, I think in many ways, the ways that we understand discipline, the way that we understand risk is often interpreted through a lens of masculinity. That if a girl is going to perform well in one way, we forgive either the other behaviors or we pretend that they're not there. But we almost never seek to explore the root causes of this conflict, and so we don't see our girls.
As we are talking about not seeing our girls, I consistently try to think about the good, bad, ugly that we didn't talk about in the context of the Obama administration, not only as a matter of policy, but particularly the symbolic inability to see our girls. So I just remember how powerfully important it was when President Obama acknowledged in 2 different occasions his capacity for empathy for Trayvon Martin. The first time saying, if I had a son, he would look like Trayvon.
Right, remember that.
Right? Mm-hmm. Now that did not change the outcome of that trial, right? It did not, right? But it was, for black folk, I mean, I don't know what white folk were doing, but for black folk,
yeah.
When the American state embodied in the President of the United States says, if I had a son, it would have been this person, it shifted in a powerful, symbolic way, something about who we were in the world that the president saw Trayvon, right?
Yeah.
If I had a son, he'd be Trayvon. And then after the verdict, right, Trayvon would have, you know, that I have had those same experiences, right? So implying, had you given Trayvon a chance to grow up, he might have been me, right? Both sides of it.
Yeah.
Again, doesn't change the outcome, but is beautiful and powerful, right? And alters our capacity for how we talk about violence over and against black boy bodies. Changes what that movement can be in part.
Yeah.
Now he actually has 2 daughters. He has them. They're standing there.
Yeah, they're beautiful.
They're extraordinary. And they're kind of like, I mean, particularly Sasha. There's a lot. Sasha's my favorite. I mean, as far as I can tell, she did not come to the last thing because she just really actually could not get her face together behind the Trump at all. I mean, I enjoy her publicly. Like public Sasha, I don't know personal Sasha. So why do you think when the school resource officer throws a little girl to the ground, we don't get that could be my daughter, that could be Sasha, that could be Malia?
Yeah, publicly.
Publicly. I mean, I don't know what he's doing privately, but because I don't care what he's doing. I don't know Barack Obama. I'm talking about President Obama.
I get it.
I'm not talking about who. I mean, who cares?
I get it.
I mean, like who cares?
Yeah,
I actually think George W. Bush likes black people.
Yeah.
Personally, like that. I'm not. Who cares? I'm talking about the president.
Yeah. What I have found is that a lot of people, when they see girls get in trouble, they just ask the wrong question, and they start with that question, and it's always, what did she do? And there's this sort of understanding that we share, even if we don't articulate it, that she must have done something with her sassy attitude and her big mouth to deserve that kind of treatment.
But if you have a sassy daughter.
Oh, no, I get it. I don't know why there was no public statement about what went down in that classroom, and I know that there was administrative efforts to come in response to that, but the symbolic gesture of claiming this black girl was not there. Now, I'm less concerned, I think so I will say this, I think it is important that we have leadership that acknowledges the presence of black girls, especially if they're willing to do it for black boys. And I've always said that While, you know, I felt the investment in Black boys was a necessary investment, it would fail if it was going to be done to the exclusion of Black girls. Always said that, and I stand with that truth, because our girls are experiencing the same degree of criminalization and surveillance that our boys are. And if we can't see that, then that's a blind spot that we have, because the data show it, the experiences and narratives of girls show it, and if we are not willing to tackle our own patriarchal structures of examining some of these conditions, then that's on us to work on. But in the meantime, there are a lot of people riding hard for Black girls. And so we want to amplify that number for sure. But when I saw him not say anything about what was going on in South Carolina with that video and with several other incidences that have made it to the public domain around Black girls specifically being engaged in ways that are harsh overreactions to their behaviors in schools, all I kept thinking was, you know, we have more work to do to work at a local level to make sure that people value the lives of Black girls. So usually when I start my conversations, right, I'll be like, I just want to establish first and foremost that I believe Black girls are sacred and loved. And if we start with that space around Black girls being sacred and loved, then it requires us to engage them a little differently. It requires us to see them differently, not through some weird, you know, way of interpreting their behaviors as so clean and pristine that we, you know, put them on a pedestal. That's not useful. But to acknowledge all the different ways in which they are sacred to us and sacred for us, and yet invisible in so many ways to our constructs of femininity, invisible in so many ways in our articulations of justice, even as they are helping to design those articulations of justice. And certainly in this conversation about discipline, requiring us to think about what it is exactly that we are trying to discipline.
So we're going to come to discipline. I got one more cultural piece.
Yeah.
Because I want to just get some of this there so that we can get, because I think all of this impacts what we're doing in schools. We talk about R. Kelly.
He gets no play in my ride. He hasn't since 1994.
Well, that's right. But, I mean, so I was living in Chicago during the first trial.
Yeah.
The only trial, I guess. And I remember the urban radio station increased radio play, right? Because this is the aura. It's our hometown boy.
Yeah.
And, you know, just as Clarence Thomas could claim a high-tech lynching, and Tyson, right? When our boys and our men are facing this criminal justice system that seeks to put them away, the violence done to our girls and women becomes, I mean, they increased, they were like, we're gonna have an all-aura block.
Yeah. Yeah, so finish that. You said the violence that happens becomes irrelevant.
I can't. Yes.
Like that's what it is.
It becomes
irrelevant. Yes.
Or not even irrelevant, like justifiable. Justifiable.
It's hard because of the structures of oppression that we live with. We definitely engage in the Vegas mentality, right? What happens in this community stays in this community. And when we go outward and start airing dirty laundry or talking about what kind of pain women have to explore and experience, we get cast as not ride or die for our people. And our commitment to justice is questioned in a different way. The Me Too movement now offers a space for women to explore sexual violence, and for what, at least from what I've observed, white women are not experiencing the same degree of being called a race traitor for elevating the conditions that were harmful to them in their communities. And yet that has consistently been a narrative because of the ways that structural oppression, cultural oppression, et cetera, play out in our communities. Black women that's one of the reasons why I think Black girls are so sacred is we have this extraordinary capacity to hold space, an extraordinary capacity to, from our youngest years, see injustice and hold a space for healing, even when it doesn't make sense. And so we see this capacity to hold space as somehow they'll get through it, as this sort of extraordinary capacity to be resilient. And so they're often cast as being fine, even if they're not. The internalization of that trauma manifests in our bodies, in our emotional, spiritual well-being. We tend to be a God-loving group of people, which also helps, right? But it also doesn't replace the real outcomes of trauma that may be invisible because we don't typically express outward and manifest in outward behaviors. Now, when they do, then, you know, the ish hits the fan. Then these are girls, these girls got a bad attitude, these girls got a mouth on them, these girls are unruly, incorrigible, you know, things that were said about some of our greatest heroes. Ella Fitzgerald was once incorrigible and sent to a group home, right, because she had a mouth on her, right? So we're able to see only when they elevate to the status of a Rosa Parks and Fannie Lou Hamer that this is a valuable tool for survival. But to the extent that we're able to live this truth in everyday life becomes more complicated.
So now I want to take all those insights. I want to take them to class.
Yeah.
Take them to school.
Yeah.
All right. Let's just, we won't have forever, but I want to start in kindergarten and go to college.
Okay.
Because it's a lot, and we see it manifest at all the levels.
Yeah.
Okay.
We do.
So let's just start in kindergarten because, or even pre-K.
Yeah.
In part because this is often a space where there is, with the point that you made about they must have done something, often I can, when I put up the stats about like pre-K arrests and pre-K suspensions, it's, you know, almost no matter the politics of the room, the partisanship of the room, you'll get some gasps.
Oh, yeah.
Because most people who've ever been around any 3-year-old recognize that they're all bipolar.
They're going to have a tantrum.
Yeah, I mean, they are by definition bipolar, right? And then if you give it sugar.
You said it.
Well, yeah, it's a 3-year-old. It will be human soon. No, I'm just any day, right? Yeah. Right. No, right. I mean, children, like little people, don't make no sense from like an adult behavioral perspective, right? Yeah. That you can't bring it in, boy, girl, black, white, brown, nobody, and make it sit in a chair and say words to it, and for more than like 2 minutes, it would just jump and like my chickens and my puppies and my children, and then so you have to have activities and woo, and then we'll do some things. So you should have just a few of them together ever.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Children.
Yeah, children, babies.
Right,
mm-hmm.
Yes,
mm-hmm.
right. And
mm-hmm.
so if you have a small child that bounces off a wall, a policeman probably is not necessary.
That's what I believe.
Yeah.
And it's been, you know, one of those things that helped me, I think, feel the necessity to write a book about it was that we were seeing 6- and 7-year-old girls who have tantrums being arrested in schools, suddenly seen as threats to the safety of the classroom.
Because this may not be a trauma. I just want to point out, sometimes people are having trauma reactions,
yes.
but like a 4-year-old having a tantrum is not necessarily a trauma reaction.
Some of the discipline outcomes that we see are from our own making. They are of our own making. These are contrived situations that are criminalizing normal behaviors. Mm-hmm. I do want to say that, right? Like there are disturbing schools laws. Those are ridiculous, right? The things we're talking about, I know this is a conversation about charter schools, but I want to be very clear that you know, the issues that we're talking about, that I talk about in Pushout, cut across the spectrum. Because ultimately, when we're talking about little kids, when we're talking about them as they grow into their adolescence and adulthood, that it's about our prevailing consciousness. It's about what we think of these children. It's about whether we can even acknowledge their children in the first place. I talk about age compression in the book. Georgetown called it adultification of Black girls, and really thinking about how we understand Black girlhood and how we still operate in paradigms of structural oppression. I mean, the conversations before this about what was contributing to the absence of diversity or some of the barriers to diversity included, I saw somebody bravely and correctly include white supremacy, right? That's a dominant framework that absolutely informs how we structure our own understandings of people, of children, right? If this girl is not behaving a certain way, then suddenly something's wrong with her, rather than critiquing some of these structures that have put forth certain ideas as being the measure of all personhood, of all girlhood, of all womanhood. And so, there's lots to unpack in that, but when you're in a classroom and you're thinking about the function of schools as either having the capacity to maintain a status quo or interrupt a status quo, then you have to be intentional. I think the panel was talking about that, reaping the benefits of diversity, really about setting intentions, but being intentional in practices and in approach, and in my world, in dismantling the structural oppressions that inform our own understandings and interactions with our girls.
So I'm sitting here thinking, all right, if I have a classroom of 4 and 5 year olds, right? Early education.
Yeah.
And my experience as the teacher is that I am well trained. I have received a degree in education. We've talked about this a lot. We read your book when I was in my undergraduate classes. I did my student teaching, and I was in a classroom of 4 and 5 year olds. I had a master teacher who talked to me about some of these experiences. There are 15 kids in my class, but I have a student aide, or an aide, or maybe I am the aide, but there's 2 of us in there. I don't have a second job at the end of the day because, I'm well paid. Right? So like at the end of my day, yeah, I'm done with my jobs. I don't go to the mall and fold bras for another 4 hours to make ends meet. I'm pretty confident about my family's health status because I have health insurance for me and for my children as well. I live in a decent home in a good community. And by the way, I can also make my kids' parent-teacher conference because I have some flexibility, some sick leave, and some personal time because I have a union. I might have the ability to read the behaviors of my students in ways that are, I might have more space, more margins in my mind, in my emotions, in my capacity. I suspect that white supremacy, patriarchy are always operational, but that we can also lessen their effects by creating the most positive, productive work environments for educators who are the most professionalized and trained in working with diverse learning environments, rather than, for example, putting young people who were business majors, who had 3 months of training at TFA, into a classroom in a very high needs community in which they've never had any of these conversations, and suddenly so I get why that kid calls the police. They're wrong to do it, but I also understand that some of that perpetuation is structural. And I'm wondering if sometimes when we talk about what's happening with students, we don't talk about what's happening with teachers like they're 2 separate issues.
Yeah. No, I think there's ongoing work with all of us to undo our practice of perpetuating white supremacist notions that result in negative outcomes for those most vulnerable. And I think you know, a lot of the teachers who, I mean, first of all, you know, I think teachers fundamentally enter the profession for the most part because they believe in the promise of education, and for the most part, though it's arguable in some cases, they like kids. And I think that it's important to love kids to do this work. I started teaching at an early age through the Summerbridge Breakthrough Program when I was, oh, we got some Breakthrough Collaborative folks. And I learned early on that though I was young, I had to still love teaching, but I also really had to love the people that I was tasked to teach. And when I taught in New Orleans, when I taught in San Francisco, I learned very early on that we had to engage a rigor around what we teach, how we teach it, and fundamentally that the value of our teaching is critical to maintaining structures of promise and structures of equity. So it really didn't matter that you know, there were other people in the room who may not have come from, you know, a structured teaching background. If they loved kids and they had the kind of investment from those who were leading schools, they could apply those teachings or those sort of fundamental beliefs and values to the practice of transferring knowledge, of building structures and running classrooms in ways that honor this deep commitment to doing this work in real ways. For me, all of this boils down to being able to participate in anti-oppression work. Education is anti-oppression work. If you're not about it, you're not teaching for real. That's how I feel. If you are not about it and you're not teaching for real, that means you are just engaging in the practice of supporting white supremacist ideals and notions and practices in the society, and you are moving through classrooms, you are moving through material, you are moving through disciplines in ways that will sustain this harm in communities. The biggest promise I think that we have in responding to the issues that I talk about in Pushout or that I've heard talked about today, I think are really in this idea that if we want to engage in change, certainly it has to be done with intention, but really it's got to be done in a way that honors that this is freedom work and that honors that in the commitment to be anti-oppressive requires us to do our own deep work around our own beliefs, our own practices, and the policies we have in place to either make up crimes to get kids out or to fail to create conditions that allow for us to recognize trauma when it's present and respond accordingly. I don't think discipline and accountability are the same. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to say that. Mm-hmm. I think that when we're talking about all these issues, what we need to be talking about are response strategies to behaviors, response strategies to conditions, not necessarily discipline or consequence, which is what we've said today. Mm-hmm. And if we're doing this work and we're working with young people and we understand that education is youth development work and anti-oppression work, then we understand that it requires the kinds of investments that allow for us to really dismantle the structures that I'm just mentioning here.
Okay, so we're gonna do a quick lightning round,
okay,
and then I wanna open it up.
All right.
So lightning round is, I'm just gonna say some words.
Okay.
And you're gonna give me, I mean, these are big words.
Okay.
I mean, small words, but like big ideas.
Okay, okay.
But I'm gonna give you some, and just give me like sort of some reactions, and then I'm gonna open it up so we can be in conversation.
Okay.
All right. Middle school uniforms.
Ridiculous. I think that Black girls definitely are in positions with middle school uniforms when bodies are changing to have their bodies be policed in ways that perpetuate rape culture, that are deeply problematic because they, I think while we're intended to maintain a sense of uniformity, hence the name uniform, ultimately result in young people or in schools prioritizing what children look like when they come to school over the fact that they're actually at school.
Zero tolerance policy.
Totally ineffective, problematic, and should be totally eliminated.
Armed teachers for self-defense of students.
Insane and
No, I just, because I wanted to expect.
Oh, and I will add, and guaranteed to harm children of color.
Well. DACA.
Opportunity, you know, it's an opportunity for us to think about how we want to build and structure our society. We have, I run a pilot educational reentry program for girls with a nonprofit in the Bay Area and with a local school district. And 90% of our girls have been commercially sex trafficked. Our girls are all Black and Latina girls. And it was the conversation about failing to respond to our immigrant girls really led to our girls feeling like there was no investment or interest in their well-being and stopped coming, and some of them stopped coming to school. It's a missed opportunity, I think, for this nation to really explore what is fundamentally important to us. And we have to develop new rubrics for examining who we want to be and how we want to express that. I think a limited number of people are having the power to articulate our collective understanding of what it means to be in this country, and I think that's deeply problematic.
Two more. Music class?
Better.
Right.
Music. I love music. It's healing. It is something that I think people are losing. I'm a former trombone player in the jazz band, and lover of all things produced by Prince. And so I think it really is.
It was some serious mourning. I remember it was a situation.
Yeah, I did mourn. I still celebrate. But I think the capacity to play music and to create and to express in that way is part of how we learn. And to take that away and to not prioritize it in our practice of learning is a missed opportunity and a huge mistake.
All right, this is the last one, and then I'm opening it up. Single-sex classrooms.
Single-sex classrooms, I think, can be effective, and I think that there are also opportunities for us to think about ways of exploring meaningful opportunities for them to learn together also. One, I think it presents a challenge for young people who express along a gender continuum and identity continuum, but when young people are in same-sex classrooms, oftentimes they're able to have safer conversations about certain things. I mentioned the pilot educational reentry program that we run for girls, which is operated in a single-sex classroom, which does provide opportunities for gender-responsive healing practices to take place. And in those practices, we're able to explore certain questions around identity in spaces where young people feel safe to do so. Where they have not necessarily been safe to do so in co-ed learning spaces. That said, I think that there's tremendous value in being able to have conversations and learn in spaces with mixed company, so to speak. I think that there are great opportunities to think through how we examine this question around sex and how we examine this question around gender and how we incorporate those ideas into our constructs of teaching and our pedagogical practices.
Thank you. I think I'm allowed to, do 2 questions. Or comments? Protests?
Hi, I'm AJ Febles with Chiefs for Change. Huge honor to hear you both speak and really grateful for you being here today. So I have a 2-part question. I'm wondering how charter schools have influenced the status quo of over-disciplining girls of color, and I'm also curious if there are any notable policies in education or otherwise that are helping regain the trust of Black girls and also improving their experience in school.
Yeah, I mean, so charter schools have not reported at the same levels as other schools around discipline data, but from what we can see, I think about 8% of charter schools share data through the OCR database. I haven't looked at the 15-16 data, but from 13-14 data, Black girls were still disproportionately overrepresented along the discipline continuum as they are in public schools. The only group of girls to be disciplined disproportionately across the discipline continuum. So I think there's still work to do. That's why I say what I'm talking about here with respect to how we discipline, what we're talking about, we're talking about across the model here. And it's partly why I think when we talk policy, we have to understand that people make policies. And so when I generally sort of talk about school to confinement pathways, I'm talking about the policies, practices, conditions, and the prevailing consciousness that inform how we engage our girls and understand and respond to them. If we don't do the work around prevailing consciousness, then we can't create policies that are ultimately going to lead with love and equity, which is what we need. That said, there are new processes in place around dress code policies that have involved girls of color, largely Black girls who do disproportionately experience a policing and reading of their bodies as a result of discipline or dress code policies that I think are interesting. I like the establishment of framework and a mission statement for if you're going to have a dress code, then be sure to have a clear written statement about it not being intended to oppress or unfairly impact a particular group, and then work with those who are tasked to implement that dress code to make sure that they're not engaging their own personal biases in the implementation of that. I think that in many ways, we've talked about the rendering of Black girls as invisible in conversations about equity. So no, a lot of Black girls have not been involved in conversations. There are definitely some promising models around Girls for Gender Equity work in New York City that did the Schools Girls, the Young Women's Initiative and the report, The Schools Girls Deserve, which lays out a tremendous number of policy impact areas written by girls, with girls. So I think that's really promising, and I think they're in a replication model around the country in certain ways. In our reentry program, the Mentoring Center, which runs the program, has been working to co-construct curriculum with girls so that it's really about building out opportunities for learning that respond to the particular interests of our most marginalized, vulnerable girls. And learning from those experiences to inform other practices that can help us engage in, and develop increasingly rigorous conversations around gender equity and being culturally competent. I think the most aggravating thing is to say our program is culturally responsive and culturally competent, and then, or it's gender responsive without some understanding of how those overlay and how that's an ongoing process. So I'm a firm believer in co-construction. I think that most educators do that inherently across the board, even up through the high school and collegiate, levels. Although, sometimes that'll lead you into some fierce debates. but I do think it's important. It's an important skill to develop the capacity to co-construct, and I think that once you become an adult, it doesn't stop.
Do we want to do a little speed round of taking some questions? This might need to be our last round.
Okay, all right. So, all right, great. Well, you have the mic, so you go.
I guess it's my turn.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, hi. Thank you both for being here. Honestly, it's truly a pleasure to listen to you both speak in person. I'm geeking out right now. How do you suggest that we engage in dismantling structural inequities when the people who are sometimes advancing some of these issues are our own, our leaders of color, our teachers of color, our principals of color?
She said, how do you fix racism?
Internalized.
When the Black that's a hard question. Yeah, we're gonna take a couple.
Oh, okay. Hello, I'm excited, I'm geeking out too. I work for an organization called the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium, and so I do work with school districts from the school level to the state level around how they can advance racial and gender equity and socioeconomic equity in their schools. I work with schools that have severe disproportionality issues, particularly with Black girls and Black boys. My question is, and I know that the issues of disproportionality cross class, but I have personally been wondering if you've noticed any differences along the lines of class amongst Black girls and how they are impacted by discipline policies in schools, and what role class differences amongst Black girls and Black families might play in the whole dynamic.
My name is Janella Hines. I am representing the United Federation of Teachers in New York City, and as a high school educator, I am really thinking about how we can start to think about our pedagogical practice. How do we interrogate what we do as educators when we're engaging with all of our students? And it is a huge honor to be here with both of you.
Okay.
Oh man, that was a lot.
So
She said internalized racism class and being a teacher. That's
Yeah.
y'all could just get comfortable for a moment.
I know we have like 1 minute.
I know. Well,
So I think, you know, one thing is the reason I talk about this in the framework of oppressions is because I think the more we start to understand how we unwillingly or willingly participate in oppression, the more we can begin to hold ourselves accountable in those spaces. So I actually do spend a lot of time with educators of color, leaders of schools who are people of color, talking about internalized oppression. And I think that those are hard conversations. They are time-consuming conversations, but they must be done. And in the same way that folks are starting to breathe into a level of comfort around talking about, you know, white privilege and white supremacy, we also really need to talk about internalized racial bias and internalized racialized gender bias and the way that it plays out against Black girls in particular in very unique ways and harsh ways, and other girls of color, Latinas who are climbing up the list and facing overrepresentation, and Indigenous girls. So I think it's really important for us to do that deep, hard work. And I haven't seen anything specific.
no, real quick.
Okay.
So Monique is not going to tell you how good she is. So that's why I'm here. So she was our Anna Julia Cooper lecturer, not this academic year, but the year before. And as part of that, she was like, well, college students, they seem fine. Let's go talk to the babies. So we have a elementary school. It's a Title I school who we have a very close relationship with, and an amazing school leader there, Dr. Amber Baker. She really is extraordinary. She's a wonderful woman. She's an amazing. All right, so I just want you to know that when Dr. Morris goes in and has tough conversations with people about internalized oppression, she does not talk to them in like weird jargon language, right? That is not, this conversation, the way y'all just had it, that was not how it went down at all. So like we're walking through and like she is giving up, because also like when you are at Kimberly Park, the babies give you love and like you see all the amazing things that Dr. Baker's doing and like, you know, Monique is giving love back and there's like a lot of goodness happening. And then we sit down to chat, and Dr. Baker's like, well, you know, I don't allow the parents to come up in here in their house coats and their house shoes and their slippers and their rollers. And Monique Morris was like, what? You said, well, why not?
Yeah.
Right? And Dr. Baker's like, we gonna be a certain way in my school. You can't come up in here like that. And the conversation that went down about like, well, why, right? And it was really beautiful and very respectful and very careful, and there was a lot of pushing, and there was like a lot of class politics, but it was not like, well, you have internalized oppression, and I'm gonna need you to read these 3 articles, and so like, I just like, so when I tell you that she does, because what just happened there will make you, that's weird. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So she's just not going to tell you that like when she's doing it, because I watched it happen and by the way, like her and Dr. Baker are still like together, and you know, like every time I said like Amber was at the house like 2 weeks ago, and like so that those relationships are because the work is hard and because it does come genuinely from a place of like love and commitment to those young people and to what that school is doing in our community, and because like it was not just to like let me come in and school you about what you need to know. It was like, let's go ahead and just start a relationship and be on a journey and a path together, because we're all complicit in a variety of ways. And let me not pretend I have it all worked out, but let's engage in this conversation about why you think that's important, and let me push back a little bit. And then, you know, Dr. Baker gave her some of what she thought, and it was a really powerful exchange.
Thank you for sharing that. I think I really genuinely think we learn more when we ask more questions. So when people invite me in, I do not intend to enter with solutions prepackaged. I think that the work, when I said I believe in co-construction, is because I believe that we have work to do and we have a lot of unanswered questions, because a lot of what I say is the research, the publications, these are all answers to questions we've already asked. And it's not to say that the questions I have are just, particularly original, but in that setting, they might be. And with this group of people, it might be a first time we're having this conversation. And so it is important to explore these important intersections around how we've internalized certain ideas, why we believe they're important, which leads to the question, I mean, it's kind of connected to the class conversation anyway, around, whether, we've seen any differences. I have not looked at that carefully to answer that question. I do have some anecdotes that I think help us frame new research questions around that. And I think that certainly a capacity to engage and have conversations with educators and speak the language of schools helps, but it doesn't cure and it doesn't directly address some of the things that we know middle class, upper middle class, high-performing Black girls still face in these spaces. And so it's really important to continue to do that. Around teachers, I love teachers, and I think that a lot of times my critique comes off as unfairly harsh to teachers. So I appreciate any time teachers want to have conversations with me about what I think is important in this work, because the work of the teacher, the pedagogy that engages our own capacity to transfer knowledge and to build institutions that allow for that transfer to happen in ways that do not produce harm or continue harm, really relies on our capacity to lead with love and understand what that looks like. I don't know that that automatically means that teachers have autonomy. I think sometimes that means teachers need some rigorous, structured decision-making tools to help guide how they're engaging, because I don't trust every teacher to come in and teach my Black child if they have not done the work. The same with every Black teacher. I don't trust every Black teacher to come in and teach my Black daughter, because if she has internalized some things and is going to transfer those things to my child, that's going to be problematic for me, right? But having the capacity to engage and explore and work on these things together, to me, is really the critical piece here. I think educators and the work of the teacher is ultimately, if it's rooted in a freedom, then it provides an opportunity for us to think about practices in our schools that uniquely give us an opportunity to reclaim power, and to reclaim power in a way that provides for the greatest opportunity for healing to occur and for safety to be present. The new book project I'm working on is about that. It's about how we build out schools as locations for healing, because even in the contrived situations, even in the places where we've created laws that make normal childhood and adolescent behavior a crime, there are still opportunities for us to explore opportunities for healing. So we create those things. We've created the other things and they're not working, right? So to maybe close my comments on this with the words of girls that I've interacted with, one of the girls that I talked to, I think she was from Chicago in Pushout, was like, we gotta try something new. Like, we've been doing this harsh discipline thing for 100 years and it's not working, right? It's not working. So can we give, like restorative practices and some other things some time to work out how we are engaging, So I think young people are really keenly aware and uniquely qualified to be active participants in this conversation about what the co-construction of a classroom looks like.
The forward to the paperback version,
Thank you.
which you should all get, makes me very happy because I wrote it, but not by myself. But not by myself. I actually wrote the forward to the paperback version with one of my students, who is an extraordinary mentee. As you were asking the question, I was thinking about the first time that Moncapur met Dr. Morris and wrote, and she was writing about her experience of having come here to DC actually and been a city year teacher. And after she read Pushout and after she met Dr. Morris, she wrote a really beautiful piece, I'll tweet it out, about how when she reflected back as a city year, her experience as a city year teacher, she realized that even though she is herself a challenging, intense Black girl in the classroom, that she often read her students who were intense, challenging Black girls in the classroom as a problem. And it's a really lovely, reflective piece of a young teacher thinking back on how she would, as she said, ride for her students in a different way now after having read this piece. When I met Monkapur, she was in my classroom telling me I was wrong. That's how we met, was her telling me I was like, no, girl, no, that's wrong. That's why we are friends and co-authors now. When she and I had this opportunity to write this, we spent a lot of time thinking about the story that we wanted to tell, how we wanted to open it, how we wanted to think about it. We actually open it with, just real quick on the class piece. So it's just the smallest story. So that 4-year-old I told you about at the beginning, girl, they've tried to put her out of preschool every day. They've tried to put her out every day for being a discipline problem. Every day, from the fancy private white girls, just every day. And so it's just to say, I don't think the push out is any different. I just think like parents, like capacity to address the push out is different. But then the question is, so now we're like keeping her in a space, we're trying to push her out. It's like, is that good? And Amber Baker just keeps me like, would you bring me the baby, right? So like, so then there's a whole question about like, so what do we define as quality schools, and what do we think is a good school, and should we just put the baby inside of one school where at least someone will love her? Like, so there's a whole set of questions, I think, right? Okay. But we started with the story of Maya Angelou. And I think, again, one of the reasons we decided to do this was just the sense that we think a lot of people get this. So I just want to read this part because it is, for me, the love piece, right? To be reminded that Maya Angelou was guided out of silence by the loving hand of an educator. Her teacher did not practice zero tolerance or call a school resource officer who would have slammed Marguerite to the ground. She saw the fragility of a child, a girl who harmful forces were trying to break, and knew that she needed to be drawn gently back into the world. She helped a young girl full of pain and potential regain her voice through a love of literature and poetry. Along with the heavy burdens of trauma and poverty, her youth was also filled with meaningful opportunities to learn and grow and discover her talents while expressing the acceptance and care of her community. Dr. Angelou transformed those opportunities into a life of singular accomplishment and remarkable contribution. I just want us to imagine what would happen if we saw all the little Maya Angelou's in our Marguerite Johnsons that are sitting in our classrooms, who we keep having zero tolerance policies about. All of our little Monique Morrises and our Melissa Harris Perrys. And I don't know why we can't see them. And I really, really wish we would look at them with love. And I so appreciate that you have written a book and then allowed Monkapur and I to contribute to it that says that Black girls are sacred and they are loved. Thank you.